Nobody jumps into glacier water unless they are trying to die or save something worth dying for. Caleb Foster did not plan on doing either that morning. Alaska had a way of humbling people before breakfast. Wind screamed across the frozen valley hard enough to shake the walls of his small cabin, while heavy snow slapped against the windows like nature itself wanted everyone indoors. 56 years old. Former Marine. White hair beginning to creep through the edges of his beard. Bad knee from a deployment nobody asked about anymore. Caleb preferred silence these days. Silence asked fewer questions. Most mornings started the same. Black coffee. Wood stove. Weather radio warning him about conditions he could already see with his own eyes. The glacier outside town stretched endless beneath gray skies, cold and unforgiving like something ancient that stopped caring about people centuries ago. Caleb usually respected that. Men survived Alaska by respecting things bigger than themselves. That morning should have stayed ordinary. Until the sound came. Faint at first, barely noticeable beneath the storm. A weak howl somewhere far beyond the frozen ridge. Caleb looked up from his coffee immediately. Strange. Coyotes sounded sharper. Wolves traveled differently. This sounded broken somehow. Hurt. He listened again. Wind. Snow. Then silence. Probably nothing. Alaska taught hard lessons about chasing strange sounds into storms. But 5 minutes later it came again. Closer now. Shorter. Weak. Like something running out of time. Caleb sighed quietly and reached for his jacket. Terrible decision, he muttered to himself. Old Marines talked to themselves because nobody else listened. 20 minutes later, boots crunching through knee-deep snow, Caleb reached the outer ridge near Blackstone Glacier. Visibility looked terrible. Wind cut sideways hard enough to sting his face. Frozen air burned his lungs with every breath. Then he heard it again. Not a howl this time. A whimper. Close. Caleb climbed carefully over packed ice near the glacier edge and froze immediately. About 20 feet below, trapped between cracked blue ice and rushing black water, a German shepherd struggled weakly against collapsing ice. Large dog, black and tan coat barely visible beneath frozen snow. One paw slipping constantly. Exhausted. Freezing. The animal barely lifted its head when Caleb crouched near the edge. Intelligent eyes met his for exactly 1 second before dropping again. Not panic. Just exhaustion. Like the dog already gave up. Oh no, Caleb muttered quietly. Glacier cracks shifted beneath him with soft groaning sounds. Dangerous place. Very dangerous. One wrong move and both of them disappeared beneath freezing water. Nobody survived long inside. Caleb looked around quickly. No rescue crews. No snowmobiles nearby. No cell signal this deep. Just wind and ice and bad odds. Marine instincts hated hesitation. But older age loved survival. Caleb pulled back once. Thought hard. Sensible people walked away from impossible rescues. Called authorities. Waited for professionals. But professionals would never reach here fast enough. The dog did not have another hour. Maybe not another 10 minutes. Snow drifted harder now. Ice shifted beneath the German shepherd again. One sharp cry escaped the animal before it slipped farther into freezing water. Caleb stopped thinking. Marines sometimes did stupid things for good reasons. He tied emergency rope around a frozen pine root near the ridge, tightened his jacket, and dropped flat onto the ice. You better be worth this, he muttered through gritted teeth. Water hit like pain. Not cold. Pain. Sharp enough to steal air instantly from his lungs. Caleb fought hard to stay focused while freezing current shoved hard against his body. Hands numb already. Knee screaming louder than pride wanted to admit. The German shepherd barely moved anymore. Eyes half closed now. Caleb reached farther. Inches short. Come on, he shouted through wind. Nothing. He moved farther across unstable ice until cracks spread beneath his arm. Dangerous. Too dangerous. Did not matter now. One final stretch and his hand grabbed thick wet fur near the dog's shoulder. Heavy. Bigger than expected. Dead weight almost. Caleb pulled hard while ice groaned beneath them both. Water splashed violently around his chest. The dog weakly kicked once before finally collapsing against him. Together they climbed slowly back towards safer ice. Every movement hurt. Every breath burned. But quitting never came naturally to Marines. 40 brutal minutes later, Caleb stumbled back inside the cabin carrying nearly 90 pounds of half-frozen German shepherd wrapped awkwardly inside blankets. Wood stove blazing. Towels everywhere. steam rising slowly from frozen fur. The dog remained motionless near the fire while Caleb sat nearby, shaking from cold himself, hands wrapped around shaking coffee cup. "Either we both survive this," he said quietly, staring toward the unconscious animal, "or this officially becomes the dumbest thing I ever did." Hours passed. Snowstorm worsened outside. Wind rattled the cabin harder now. Then sometime after dark, Caleb looked up from his chair and noticed something strange. The German Shepherd had finally opened his eyes. But instead of looking at food, instead of warmth, instead of safety, the dog sat weakly beside the window, staring into the darkness beyond the snow, like somebody was supposed to come back for him. Caleb Foster had spent enough years alone to recognize when silence felt wrong. Most nights in Alaska sounded empty in predictable ways. Wind against frozen glass. Ice shifting somewhere far off near the glacier. The steady crackle of wood burning inside the stove. But tonight something felt different. The German Shepherd sitting beside the cabin window had not moved in nearly 20 minutes. The dog barely blinked, barely reacted to warmth, barely noticed the bowl of food Caleb finally placed beside him. Instead, those sharp, intelligent eyes stayed locked on the storm outside, like somebody important had been left behind in the snow. Caleb leaned back slowly in his old wooden chair, wrapping both hands tighter around hot black coffee. "You know," he muttered quietly, "most creatures nearly freezing to death usually appreciate warm shelter." No reaction, just watching. Strange dog. Smart dog. Not wild either. Caleb knew enough about animals to spot differences. Stray dogs paced. Stray dogs panicked. Stray dogs inhaled food like survival depended on speed. This German Shepherd stayed disciplined somehow. Controlled. Even exhausted, he moved carefully like rules still mattered. Around midnight, the dog finally stood. Slowly, weak legs shaking slightly beneath him. Caleb watched closely but did not move too fast. Marines learn patience, especially with injured things. The German Shepherd limped toward the water bowl first, drank slowly. Then something odd happened. Instead of lying back near the stove, the dog quietly walked the edge of the cabin, checking corners, pausing at windows, listening near the door, like security mattered more than rest. Caleb frowned. "That is military behavior," he said quietly to nobody. Old instincts recognized old instincts. The dog stopped near the front door and stood still, listening, then turned slightly toward Caleb as if making sure he noticed too. "What?" Caleb asked softly. Outside, wind howled harder through the mountains. Nothing else obvious. No snowmobiles. No distant headlights. No visitors. Still, something about the dog's behavior unsettled him. Around 1 a.m, Caleb finally managed sleep for maybe 2 hours before sudden movement woke him. The German Shepherd stood directly beside the bed. Alert. Silent. Not panicked. Focused. Caleb reached instinctively toward the flashlight near the nightstand. "Somebody out there?" he asked, half awake. The dog walked toward the window immediately. Waiting. Caleb slowly stood and looked outside. Snow still falling heavy. Darkness everywhere. Then he noticed it. Faint light far beyond the frozen ridge near Blackstone Glacier. Small. Moving. Gone. Then back again. Strange hour. Dangerous weather. Nobody with common sense wandered glacier territory after midnight during a storm. Caleb stared harder. Light disappeared completely. Could have been reflection. Could have been imagination. But Alaska punished people who ignored strange things. "You saw that too, huh?" he muttered quietly. The German Shepherd stayed near the glass longer before finally returning toward the stove. Morning came slowly. Gray sky. Fresh snow nearly 2 feet deep outside the cabin. Caleb moved stiffly through breakfast while the dog rested near the fire, but never fully relaxed. Health improving already, though. Strong animal. Tougher than most people. Caleb placed scrambled eggs and cooked meat beside him. This time the dog finally ate. Still disciplined. Slow. Controlled. No desperation. Another clue. Around noon, Caleb noticed something else strange. The German Shepherd reacted immediately to a low helicopter sound somewhere miles away. Not fear exactly. Recognition. Ears forward. Head high. Alert posture. Then just as quickly, he moved away from the window and hid slightly beside the table. Caleb narrowed his eyes. "You've been trained?" The dog looked toward him briefly. Smart eyes. Almost too smart. Later that afternoon, Caleb carefully checked the dog for injuries. Frost damage looked minor, thankfully. A scar stretched faintly beneath wet fur near one shoulder. Old injury. Not recent. Around the neck sat faint impressions where something once rested. Collar maybe. Harness. Something heavier. Professional. Then Caleb noticed it. Small patch of torn fabric still tangled beneath thick fur. Black nylon. Durable stitching. Definitely not pet store material. Caleb carefully loosened it free. Frozen dirt still clung to faded lettering. Hard to read at first, then finally clear enough. K9. Caleb sat back slowly. Well, he said quietly, staring harder now. You definitely are not some random dog. The German Shepherd suddenly stood and walked toward the back door. Weak but determined. Then scratched once. Caleb frowned. Outside. Snowstorm still ugly. Yet something about the dog's focus changed again. Purpose. Like he remembered unfinished business. Caleb grabbed boots and jacket reluctantly. Fine, he muttered. But if this turns into one of those terrible survival stories, everybody listening better press like and subscribe because this feels expensive already. Outside, snow crunched beneath heavy boots while wind cut through trees. The dog moved slower now, but confident. Straight toward the back ridge behind the cabin. Then suddenly he stopped near packed snow and started digging furiously. Caleb Foster trusted very few things anymore. Bad weather. Old instincts. Black coffee. Those rarely lied. But standing knee-deep in fresh Alaska snow watching a half-frozen German shepherd dig furiously behind his cabin somehow felt stranger than most things life had thrown at him lately. The dog worked with purpose. Not random digging. Focused digging. Snow flying backward beneath strong paws while cold wind pushed through the pine trees overhead. Caleb tightened his jacket against the cold and frowned. You planning to explain any of this? He muttered quietly. No answer obviously. Just determination. After several minutes, the dog finally stopped and stepped back. Something metallic sat buried beneath packed snow and frozen dirt. Caleb crouched carefully, old knee reminding him winter respected nobody. He brushed away ice until fingers touched cold metal. Small device. Black. Weather damaged. About the size of a handheld radio. One corner cracked badly. Caleb turned it over slowly. GPS tracker. Military grade by the look of it. Or close enough. Definitely not something ordinary hikers carried. The German Shepherd stood beside him, watching closely. Waiting. Like this mattered. Caleb looked harder at the damaged surface. Frozen mud still covered part of it, but faint letters remained scratched along one side. Search and rescue unit. Caleb exhaled slowly through cold air. All right, he muttered. You officially became everybody else's problem too. Back inside the cabin, heat from the stove slowly melted ice from the device, while the German Shepherd settled near the door instead of resting by the fire again. Always near exits. Always watching. Caleb noticed patterns now. The dog never turned his back toward windows. Never startled at storms. But reacted immediately to certain sounds. Professional behavior. Trained behavior. Caleb finally found enough battery power to wake the device briefly. Screen flickered weakly once before fading. One saved coordinate blinked briefly before disappearing. Not enough time to read fully, but enough to recognize location direction. Blackstone Glacier region. Same area where Caleb found the dog. Same dangerous ice fields nobody sane wandered during winter. Caleb leaned back in his chair, rubbing tired eyes. Somebody lost you out there, he said quietly. Question is why. The dog lifted his head slightly, hearing his voice. Smart eyes again. Too smart. Like he understood more than Caleb liked admitting. Around sunset, storm clouds finally weakened enough for visibility to improve. Not warm. Alaska never pretended warmth mattered. But calmer. The kind of cold that felt survivable. Caleb stood near the window staring toward distant frozen ridges. Could ignore it. Smart option. Let authorities deal with strange dogs and mystery trackers. But something inside him hated unfinished things. Maybe Marines never really retired from problems. You trying to show me something? He finally asked. The German Shepherd stood immediately. Tail still. Focused. Straight toward the door. Caleb sighed heavily. Yeah. Knew that answer already. 45 minutes later, both moved carefully across snow toward Blackstone Glacier. Sky fading darker now beneath endless gray clouds. Wind softer but colder somehow. Every breath burned sharp. Caleb followed slower than pride preferred, while the German Shepherd moved confidently ahead despite recent injuries. No hesitation. No confusion. like he knew this land already. Then Caleb noticed something impossible. Fresh footprints. Human. Recent. Not buried beneath storm snow either. New. Very new. Deep impressions moving across a ridge near Glacier territory. Caleb crouched lower immediately. Large boots. Adult male probably. Moving fast. Heading toward an area officially closed after dangerous ice collapses last winter. Nobody should have been here. Nobody except rescue teams maybe. But rescue teams did not hide footprints after storms. The German Shepherd lowered his nose and followed quietly. Tracking now. Professional tracking. Caleb stayed close. Old instincts returning faster than comfort. 20 minutes later, they reached higher elevation overlooking frozen glacier valleys below. Then suddenly the dog stopped. Completely still. Ears forward. Body tense. Caleb followed his stare and saw it. Faint light moving far below between jagged ice formations. Not helicopter lights. Too low. Not emergency crews either. Wrong pattern. Flashlight maybe. Lantern. Somebody moving carefully through glacier terrain after dark during dangerous winter conditions. One person. Maybe more. Hard to tell. Caleb narrowed his eyes harder. Nobody with common sense stayed out here willingly. Yet whoever moved below seemed familiar with the area. Too comfortable. Too deliberate. Then something worse happened. The light disappeared instantly. Like whoever carried it suddenly realized they were not alone. Wind shifted harder. Silence stretched. Heavy silence. The kind Marines learned never to trust. The German Shepherd took one slow step backward toward Caleb. Protective now. Watching the ridge behind them instead of the glacier below. Caleb slowly turned. Fresh footprints. Not theirs. Another trail crossing snow farther uphill. Someone else had already been watching them. Caleb Foster stopped moving immediately. Marines learned long ago that survival sometimes depended on doing absolutely nothing. Cold wind swept hard across the glacier ridge while the German Shepherd stood pressed slightly closer to Caleb's leg, body tense. Ears locked uphill toward fresh tracks cutting across untouched snow. Somebody had been there recently. Close enough to see them. Maybe still close enough to matter. Caleb slowly crouched lower behind a jagged ice formation and studied the new footprints carefully. Heavy winter boots. Deep impressions. Adult male probably. Fresh enough that loose snow had barely settled inside them. Which meant one uncomfortable thing. Whoever made those tracks could not be far. The German Shepherd shifted once. Quiet but focused. Protective now. Not scared. Alert. Caleb trusted that difference. You know something about this, huh? He muttered softly. The dog glanced briefly toward him before returning attention uphill. Then suddenly froze harder. Head lifted slightly. Listening. Caleb listened too. At first nothing. Just wind rolling over glacier ridges. Then faint movement somewhere farther above. Crunching snow. Slow. Deliberate. Somebody walking carefully. Not running. Not lost either. People who got lost moved louder. More desperate. Caleb slowly backed lower against ice cover. 56 years old or not, Marine instincts still remembered how danger moved. The footsteps stopped. Silence again. Heavy silence. Too heavy. Like somebody out there realized they were not alone anymore. After maybe 30 seconds, the German Shepherd suddenly turned and moved downhill without warning. Fast but controlled. Looking back once to make sure Caleb followed. Yeah. Caleb muttered quietly while standing slower than pride wanted. Retreat feels smart. They moved quickly back toward lower glacier paths while daylight weakened beneath thick storm clouds. Wind picked up harder now. Snow beginning again. Alaska loved terrible timing. Halfway back, Caleb glanced once over his shoulder and froze briefly. A figure stood far up the ridge near broken ice cliffs. Hooded winter jacket. Tall. Watching. Too far to see details. Too still to feel accidental. Then wind shifted and snow swallowed the figure completely. Gone. Caleb walked faster after that. Back at the cabin, warmth hit different when danger followed you home. Caleb locked the door out of habit more than fear, while the German Shepherd immediately checked every window again. Same behavior. Same discipline. Not random. Definitely trained. Caleb dropped wet gloves near the stove and stared harder at the dog now. You got a name? He asked quietly. No answer obviously. Just those intelligent eyes watching him too carefully. Feels weird calling you dog. The German Shepherd tilted his head slightly. Caleb almost laughed despite himself. You look like trouble, he muttered. But maybe Ranger. One ear lifted. Tiny reaction. Enough. Yeah, Caleb said softly. Ranger works. Night settled hard over Alaska. Wind shaking the cabin again, while snow swallowed everything outside. Caleb spent the evening studying the damaged GPS tracker under better light. Most of the screen stayed dead. But one thing finally appeared briefly before fading again. Coordinates. Partial ones. Enough to recognize a general area near Blackstone Glacier. Restricted territory after an avalanche collapse 8 months ago. Caleb remembered headlines vaguely. Dangerous conditions. Rescue operation failure. Couple missing workers maybe. Nobody local liked talking about glacier accidents. Too cold. Too final. Rangers suddenly stood near the front window again. Alert. Watching. Same behavior as last night. Caleb looked outside carefully. Darkness everywhere. Nothing obvious. Then headlights appeared farther down the frozen access road. Strange. Nobody visited him after dark. Especially during storms. Truck engine loud enough to hear through wind before finally stopping outside. Sheriff truck. Caleb exhaled once. Better than strangers. Sheriff Ben Mercer stepped inside, carrying snow across the floor and the tired look of a man who hated winter jobs. Mid-50s. White beard. Local long enough to know everyone's business whether they liked it or not. Heard somebody nearly drown himself on glacier ice, Ben said immediately. Caleb shrugged slightly. News travels fast. Ben stopped mid-sentence, seeing Ranger standing silently near the stove. Eyes narrowed instantly. Where did you get that dog? Caleb frowned. Found him freezing out near Blackstone. Sheriff Mercer stepped closer slowly. Expression changing now. More serious. Ranger watched him carefully, but never growled. You sure? Ben asked quietly. Caleb nodded. Why? Sheriff Mercer rubbed his jaw slowly. Because 8 months ago, a search and rescue K-9 disappeared near that glacier. Silence landed heavy. Caleb glanced toward Ranger. Suddenly certain things felt less strange now. Sheriff Mercer lowered his voice slightly. Dog belonged to a handler who never came home. Ranger slowly stood and walked toward the door again. Focused. Intentional. Then stopped and looked back toward Caleb like the conversation no longer mattered. Like something else waited outside. Then without warning, lights flickered once inside the cabin before suddenly going dark. Darkness changed everything inside a remote Alaska cabin. 1 second warm yellow light filled the room. The next, nothing except storm wind outside, and the crackling glow from the wood stove throwing long shadows across wooden walls. Sheriff Ben Mercer froze near the doorway immediately. Old instincts. Rural law enforcement survived long winters by respecting strange timing. Caleb Foster slowly reached for the flashlight sitting near the kitchen counter, while Ranger stood completely still near the front door, ears forward, body tense again. Not fear. Expectation. Like something he already understood had finally arrived. Tell me your power goes out all the time, Sheriff Mercer said quietly. Caleb clicked the flashlight on. Thin white light cut through darkness. Storms knock lines down sometimes, he answered, though something about tonight felt wrong even to him. Ranger suddenly moved toward the window nearest the front porch and stopped. Silent. Watching. Caleb crossed carefully beside him and looked outside. Snow moved thick through the darkness, heavy wind pushing white sheets across frozen ground. Nothing obvious at first. No headlights. No movement. Then something caught his attention. Fresh footprints leading toward the porch. Not old tracks buried under snow. Fresh. Sheriff Mercer noticed them too. Did you have company before I got here? He asked quietly. Caleb shook his head once. Nobody. Silence stretched between them. Outside looked empty, but Alaska had taught both men something important. Empty and safe were never the same thing. Ranger let out the quietest sound Caleb had heard yet. Not barking. More like warning. Focused warning. Sheriff Mercer lowered his voice. I need you to tell me exactly where you found him. Caleb explained everything. The glacier crack. Freezing water. GPS device. Strange light near Blackstone. Fresh tracks. The hooded figure watching from the ridge. Sheriff Mercer listened without interrupting. That alone told Caleb something felt serious. Finally, the sheriff sighed heavily. 8 months ago, there was an operation near Blackstone Glacier, he said carefully. Search and rescue team. Avalanche warning. One of the K-9 handlers disappeared. Caleb glanced toward Ranger immediately. Sheriff Mercer nodded slowly. Dog matched the description exactly. Ranger. The German shepherd lifted his head, hearing the name. Small reaction. But real. Sheriff Mercer noticed too. That confirms it, he said quietly. His handler was named Lucas Grady. Good man. Former Army rescue specialist. Report said he fell through unstable ice during a storm. Never recovered. Caleb frowned. Something about the story sat wrong immediately. Then how did the dog survive 8 months alone? Sheriff Mercer hesitated. Long enough to matter. That question bothered me too. Ranger suddenly walked toward Caleb and pressed his nose briefly against Caleb's hand before moving toward the back door again. Focused. Persistent. Like unfinished business mattered more than old stories. Caleb looked toward the sheriff. He keeps doing that. Sheriff Mercer studied the dog carefully. Search dogs remember places, he said quietly. Sometimes people too. Before Caleb could answer, loud wind slammed against the side of the cabin hard enough to shake the walls. Then came something stranger. A distant mechanical sound outside. Low. Brief. Caleb moved toward the window fast. Sheriff Mercer beside him. Snow blocked visibility badly, but both men caught it for a second. Small blinking red light moving through the storm near the tree line. Not helicopter height. Too low. Too controlled. Drone, Sheriff Mercer muttered. Caleb frowned immediately. Out here. Nobody flies recreational drones during glacier storms, the sheriff answered quietly. Not unless they are looking for something. Ranger moved again. Restless now. Pacing between windows. Alert. Watching every direction. Caleb suddenly felt the cabin smaller than usual. Too isolated. Too easy to watch. Sheriff Mercer pulled radio from his coat and tried reaching dispatch. Static. Nothing useful. Storm interference. Of course. Alaska loved terrible timing. I should stay here tonight, Mercer said finally. Just until morning. Caleb nodded once. Smart idea. Nobody said it out loud, but both men understood the same thing. Somebody had likely followed Ranger. Maybe even watched Caleb bring him home from the glacier. Hours passed slowly. Snowstorm worsening again outside. Caleb brewed coffee while Ranger refused to sleep, always near doors or windows. Around midnight, Caleb noticed something strange. Ranger stopped pacing suddenly, completely still, then moved straight toward the back door and scratched once. Deliberate, not panic. Purpose. Caleb frowned. You want outside? Ranger looked directly at him. Waiting. Sheriff Mercer stood too. Maybe he is trying to show us something. Caleb hesitated only briefly before grabbing heavy jackets and flashlight. Dangerous idea. Cold dangerous. But every strange answer lately somehow started with following the dog. Outside, freezing air hit hard enough to sting lungs instantly. Ranger moved through deep snow slower now, but confident despite injury. Straight past the woodpile. Past frozen fence posts. Toward the northern ridge behind the cabin. Then suddenly he stopped near heavy drifted snow and began digging hard. Again. Faster this time. Caleb crouched beside him and brushed snow away with gloved hands until flashlight beam hit something unexpected buried beneath ice. Torn fabric. Bright orange rescue jacket material. Sheriff Mercer froze beside him immediately. One faded name patch still attached. Lucas Grady. Caleb Foster forgot about the cold for exactly 3 seconds. That was how long it took for his brain to catch up with what sat buried beneath snow behind his cabin. Torn orange rescue fabric. Faded stitching. Weather damage from months outside. One name patch barely holding together beneath ice. Lucas Grady. Sheriff Ben Mercer crouched lower immediately, flashlight shaking slightly in gloved hands. Nobody said anything at first. Wind carried hard across the ridge while snow continued falling sideways through the darkness. Ranger stood beside them completely still. Watching. Waiting. Not confused. Not surprised. Like he had finally brought someone back to what mattered. Caleb carefully brushed more snow aside. More torn fabric surfaced beneath packed ice. Small metal buckle from rescue gear. Weathered rope fibers frozen deep into the drift. Not enough to explain anything, but enough to make old assumptions suddenly feel weak. Sheriff Mercer finally stood slowly. This should not be here, he said quietly. Caleb looked toward him. Meaning? Mercer stared hard at the name patch again. Official report said Lucas disappeared near Lower Glacier collapse almost 10 miles east from here. Silence landed heavy again. Caleb glanced toward Ranger. The German shepherd had already lowered his nose back into the snow. Searching. Focused. Working. Like this had never stopped being a mission. You think he led us here? Caleb asked quietly. Sheriff Mercer nodded once. I think he has been trying to. Ranger suddenly turned and began moving farther uphill behind the cabin. Slow at first, then faster, looking back once. Waiting. Caleb sighed quietly. I hate following dangerous ideas. Mercer grabbed his flashlight tighter. Funny thing about Alaska, he muttered. Danger usually finds people anyway. 20 minutes later, all three pushed through deep snow across narrow ridges north of the property. Ranger tracked confidently despite exhaustion, moving with purpose through terrain that looked impossible to navigate at night. Caleb struggled to keep pace, old knee reminding him 56 felt older during winter. Trees thickened higher up. Wind softened slightly beneath dense pines. Then Ranger stopped suddenly near a hidden rock formation almost completely buried beneath snow. At first Caleb saw nothing unusual. Then flashlight beam caught something unnatural tucked behind fallen ice. A tarp. Dark green. Half frozen against stone. Somebody had hidden something there deliberately. Sheriff Mercer exchanged one long look with Caleb before carefully pulling back frozen tarp edges. Beneath sat several sealed supply crates. Waterproof. Heavy duty. No official markings. No emergency rescue labels either. Caleb frowned immediately. Nobody leaves equipment like this out here. Mercer crouched lower, inspecting one crate. Expression tightening. These are recent. Ranger paced nearby restlessly now. Nose working hard against the air. Alert again. Protective. Caleb noticed something else then. Boot prints. Recent ones leading away from the hidden area deeper toward Glacier access trails. Multiple people this time. More than one visitor. Suddenly, the old military feeling returned to Caleb's chest. That quiet warning feeling. The kind that told Marines something underneath the story did not fit. You said Lucas disappeared investigating avalanche risks? Caleb asked quietly. Sheriff Mercer hesitated too long. Officially. Caleb looked harder. Meaning unofficially? Mercer exhaled hard through cold air. Rumors started after Lucas vanished. Strange helicopter activity near Blackstone. Equipment deliveries nobody explained. Some locals thought somebody was using Glacier routes for illegal transport. Caleb stared back toward the crates. Nothing dramatic. Nothing obvious. But enough to feel wrong. Ranger suddenly stiffened again. Ears forward. Head lifted high. Listening. Caleb heard it seconds later. Low mechanical sound somewhere above tree line. Brief. Distant. Then closer. Red blinking light appeared moving through snowfall overhead. Small. Controlled. Drone again. Sheriff Mercer cursed quietly beneath his breath. We need to move. Ranger already moved first, leading fast downhill through narrow snow trails. No hesitation. Like he understood being watched meant danger now. Caleb followed hard despite knee pain building sharper with every step. Wind picking up again. Storm returning stronger. Halfway back toward the cabin, headlights suddenly appeared through snow below on the access road. Vehicle stopped near Caleb's property. Engine still running. Wrong time. Wrong place. Sheriff Mercer slowed immediately. That is not mine. Caleb narrowed his eyes. Dark truck. No emergency markings. Somebody standing near the front porch. Hard to make out details through snow, but definitely human. Tall. Hooded jacket. Waiting. Ranger let out the lowest warning growl Caleb had heard yet. Not fear. Recognition. Caleb crouched slightly behind tree cover. Old Marine instincts awake now whether he wanted them or not. You know him? He whispered toward Ranger. The German shepherd never took his eyes off the figure near the cabin. Then something strange happened. The person stepped back toward the truck, paused, and slowly looked uphill directly toward where Caleb stood hidden between trees. Too far to see faces. Too dark for certainty. But Caleb felt something cold settle deeper than winter. Whoever that was did not seem surprised someone watched from the ridge. Almost like they expected it. Then truck lights switched off completely, leaving only darkness and falling snow between them. Caleb Foster had learned something important during his years in the Marines. Most danger announced itself long before it arrived. Not with noise. Not with drama. Small things. Silence changing. Animals noticing something first. The wrong vehicle parked in the wrong place at the wrong hour. Standing halfway down the ridge with freezing wind cutting across his face, Caleb kept his eyes locked on the dark truck near the cabin. No movement now. No headlights. Just stillness wrapped in heavy snow. The kind of stillness that felt deliberate. Sheriff Ben Mercer crouched beside him behind tree cover, breathing slowly through his scarf. That truck should not be there, he said quietly. Caleb nodded once. Feels like whoever it belongs to knows exactly where we are. Ranger stood slightly ahead, body low, ears forward, completely focused on the cabin below. Not fear. Recognition again. The kind that unsettled Caleb more every time he saw it. You know something? Caleb whispered softly toward the dog. Ranger glanced back briefly, then looked toward the truck again. Waiting. Watching. Caleb trusted instincts. His own. The dog's too. We do not walk straight into this, he said quietly. Sheriff Mercer agreed immediately. Back trail, he muttered. North side. Less visible. They moved carefully through heavy snow around the ridge, using pine cover to stay hidden while storm winds strengthened again. Visibility dropped hard. Snow falling thicker now. Alaska always seemed ready to erase people without effort. Halfway down the back trail, Ranger suddenly stopped and turned sharply toward lower woods near the frozen creek. Ears locked. Listening. Caleb listened too. At first nothing. Then faint voices somewhere through the wind. Distant. Human. More than one person. Hard to hear clearly. Sheriff Mercer frowned immediately. Nobody should be out here tonight. Ranger shifted uneasily, then moved toward the creek trail instead of the cabin. Caleb hesitated. Home sat one direction. Trouble sat the other. Somehow trouble kept winning lately. This dog is going to kill my retirement, Caleb muttered quietly before following. 20 minutes later, through thick snowfall, they found headlights half buried in drifting snow near a dangerous roadside curve overlooking frozen riverbanks. SUV. Hazard lights blinking weakly. Tires stuck deep off-road. Family vehicle. Sheriff Mercer moved faster now. Inside sat a young couple and teenage girl wrapped in blankets. Worried and freezing, but unharmed. Engine dead. Heater gone. Snowstorm growing worse. Road disappeared beneath us. The father explained quickly. Phone signal gone too. Caleb glanced toward the mountain road behind them. Dangerous weather. No tow truck reaching here tonight. Ranger stood quietly near the teenage girl who looked frightened until she slowly reached toward him. Surprisingly, Ranger lowered himself calmly beside her. Protective somehow. Familiar. Caleb noticed the tension leave her face almost immediately. Sheriff Mercer looked toward Caleb, already knowing the answer. Your cabin? Caleb sighed softly. Yeah. Guess we are running a hotel now. 45 exhausting minutes later, everyone crowded inside Caleb's warm cabin while snow pounded hard outside. Wood stove glowing. Coffee brewing. Soup heating slowly. Temporary safety. Ranger finally rested near the front door, but still watched every window carefully. The teenage girl quietly scratched behind his ears. He feels like he is guarding everybody, she whispered. Caleb looked over from the stove. Pretty sure he takes the job seriously. For the first time in days, something softer settled over the room. Small laughter. Warm food. Storm outside instead of inside. Caleb almost forgot about trucks and hidden crates for maybe 10 minutes. Then Ranger stood suddenly. Completely alert again. Every muscle tight. Eyes fixed on the front window. Silence hit the room immediately. Sheriff Mercer slowly stood too. Outside, through blowing snow, movement crossed near the tree line. Human shape. Hooded jacket again. Same height Caleb saw before. Standing still near the property edge. Watching the cabin. Watching them. Then disappearing between trees. Caleb grabbed flashlight instinctively. Sheriff Mercer already reaching for radio, though static still ruled the signal. That is not coincidence anymore, Mercer said quietly. Caleb nodded slowly. No, Ranger walked directly toward Caleb, then back toward the door. Waiting. Intentional. Like he wanted Caleb to understand something important. Caleb crouched beside him. You trying to tell me whoever that is matters? Ranger lowered his head briefly. Then without warning moved toward the corner near the woodpile by the back entrance. Nose working fast now. Digging lightly against stacked supplies. Caleb frowned and moved closer. Something hidden behind old storage bins caught flashlight beam. Small weatherproof case covered in dirt and dust. Not his. Definitely not his. Sheriff Mercer crouched beside him. Caleb slowly opened it. Inside sat folded maps of Blackstone Glacier, handwritten notes, and one photograph. Lucas Grady standing beside Ranger near Glacier Cliffs. But somebody else stood in the background too. Same hooded jacket. Same tall figure watching from a distance. Ranger had not been leading Caleb Foster in circles. That truth settled heavily inside the cabin, while storm winds battered frozen windows outside, like something impatient wanted in. Caleb stared at the photograph again beneath flashlight glow. Lucas Grady smiling beside Ranger near Blackstone Glacier. Snow on both of them. Same mountain ridge visible behind. Same frozen cliffs. But farther back, partly hidden between trees, stood a tall figure wearing the same hooded jacket Caleb had already seen near the ridge and outside the cabin. Watching. Even in the old photograph, the figure somehow looked wrong. Too distant. Too still. Like someone never meant to be noticed. Sheriff Ben Mercer leaned closer. That picture was taken weeks before Lucas disappeared, he said quietly. Caleb frowned harder. Then whoever that guy is has been around this story since the beginning. Ranger sat beside the table now, eyes fixed on the photograph. Alert. Intentional. Like he already knew what mattered. The stranded family sat quietly near the stove, sensing adult tension without understanding details. Caleb lowered his voice. Maybe Lucas found something he was not supposed to. Mercer nodded slowly. That rumor about strange supply runs near Blackstone never felt random. Caleb opened the weatherproof case again. More documents sat underneath folded maps. Handwritten notes. Coordinates. Weather reports. Small details only somebody tracking patterns would bother collecting. One note stopped him immediately. Cargo routes under ice shelf. Another line underneath circled twice. They are not moving rescue equipment. Caleb felt something cold settle deeper than the storm outside. Lucas had not disappeared investigating weather. He had been investigating people. Ranger stood suddenly and walked closer, nudging Caleb's hand once before staring toward one specific folded map. Caleb carefully opened it across the table. Blackstone Glacier stretched across marked sections in red pen. Several routes highlighted. One location circled heavily near a collapsed ice tunnel. Beside it sat handwritten words. If anything happens, Ranger knows the way. Caleb looked toward the German shepherd slowly. You have been trying to take me there this whole time. Ranger lowered himself quietly beside the map. Calm. Focused. Like mission confirmed. Sheriff Mercer exhaled hard. Lucas trusted that dog more than anybody. Caleb looked back towards storm-covered windows. Then maybe Ranger never got lost. Silence followed. Heavy silence. Emotional silence. Because suddenly everything felt different. Ranger had not survived 8 months randomly wandering Alaska. Ranger had waited. Protected clues. Stayed near the glacier because somebody still needed to finish something Lucas started. Caleb rubbed tired hands against his face. He came looking for help, he muttered quietly. Strange thought. Emotional thought. But true somehow. The dog had nearly died trying to get somebody's attention. Not food. Not shelter. Help. Then headlights flashed suddenly outside. Everybody in the cabin froze. Sheriff Mercer moved immediately toward the window while Caleb stood slower beside him. Same dark truck parked near the road again. Engine running this time. Snow blowing hard around it. Hooded figure standing near tree line. Watching. Waiting. Not approaching. Ranger stepped directly between the family and the front door. Protective instinct immediate. The teenage girl near the stove whispered softly. He is guarding us. Caleb noticed something else then. The hooded figure slowly raised an arm toward the cabin. Not threatening. Pointing. Toward the northern glacier ridge. Then turned back toward the truck. Seconds later headlights disappeared into the storm. Gone again. Mercer frowned deeply. That felt intentional. Caleb nodded slowly. Like somebody wanted us to see something. Ranger moved immediately toward the door. Tail still. Body tense. Ready. Caleb laughed softly once despite himself. You really are not letting this go, are you? Ranger waited. Focused. Determined. Mercer looked outside again. Storm gets worse by morning. If we go tonight. Caleb hated that answer because it sounded exactly right. 20 minutes later, after making sure the stranded family stayed safely locked inside with emergency supplies and backup radio, Caleb and Sheriff Mercer geared up for freezing weather. Flashlights. Thermal layers. Emergency packs. Ranger waited near the porch already facing north toward Blackstone Glacier like he memorized every step months ago. Snow hit hard immediately outside. Wind stronger than before. Dangerous cold. But something deeper pushed Caleb forward now. Maybe unfinished things bothered old Marines too much. Maybe loneliness recognized loyalty when it saw it. Halfway across the frozen ridge, Ranger suddenly stopped near a narrow ice trail Caleb never noticed before. Hidden. Dangerous. Almost invisible beneath drifting snow. He looked back once. Waiting for Caleb again. then moved forward carefully into darkness. Sheriff Mercer muttered quietly behind him. "Whatever Lucas found," he said, breathing hard through the cold. "I think we are about to find it too." Then farther ahead, through blowing snow near Glacier cliffs, a faint light flickered once beneath the ice like somebody was still down there. Caleb Foster had survived deployments, storms, and enough lonely winters to know one truth. Sometimes the thing waiting at the end of fear was not danger. Sometimes it was truth. Ranger moved carefully ahead through deep snow, leading Caleb and Sheriff Ben Mercer along the hidden glacier path with quiet confidence despite exhaustion. Wind screamed harder across Blackstone Glacier now, sharp enough to sting exposed skin, while snow drifted sideways beneath dark skies. Then they saw it again. Faint light beneath the ice shelf ahead. Weak. Flickering. Too steady to be natural. Ranger stopped near a narrow opening hidden between fractured glacier walls, almost impossible to spot beneath snow. He looked back once toward Caleb, waiting, like this moment mattered more than every step before it. Caleb crouched lower and shined his flashlight through the opening. A small hidden space stretched beneath the glacier. Not natural. Temporary shelter. Supply crates. Weather equipment. Portable generators. Somebody had been using the glacier for far more than rescue work. Sheriff Mercer exhaled sharply. Lucas was right, he muttered quietly. Caleb stepped carefully inside, while Ranger moved immediately toward one corner. Snow and ice covered much of the floor, but scattered papers remained trapped beneath frozen gear. Maps, shipping notes, delivery routes. Enough proof to tell a dangerous story without anybody speaking. Illegal supply movement through abandoned glacier routes. Quiet, hidden, easy to miss in winter. Then Caleb noticed something else. A weathered journal sealed inside waterproof plastic. Lucas Grady's name written clearly across the front. Caleb opened carefully. Pages damaged, but readable. Entry after entry described growing suspicion. Strange helicopter visits. Equipment arriving that never appeared in official reports. Unknown men near glacier routes. Then one final entry circled heavily. If something happens to me, Ranger knows where to go. Somebody needs to finish this. Caleb stopped reading for a moment. Cold sat heavier now. Not from weather. From understanding. Ranger had not wandered aimlessly after Lucas disappeared. The dog had stayed. Waited. Protected clues. Survived impossible winters, just trying to bring somebody trustworthy back here. Sheriff Mercer shook his head slowly. That dog stayed loyal 8 months waiting for somebody to listen. Caleb looked toward Ranger quietly. The German shepherd stood calmly nearby, watching both men with patient eyes like he never doubted this day would come. Then sudden movement outside caught Mercer's attention. Headlights again, faint through snow near the glacier entrance. Same truck. Caleb moved toward the opening slowly. Hooded figure standing near the ridge again. Still, watching. But something different happened this time. The figures slowly lowered their hood. Older man. Weathered face. Hands raised slightly. Not threatening. Tired looking more than dangerous. He stayed several yards away. Lucas tried to stop people who took over glacier routes. The man finally said over the wind. Calm voice. Quiet voice. I worked maintenance. Saw too much. Tried warning him. Caleb frowned immediately. Then why disappear? The man looked toward Ranger briefly. Sadness crossing his face. Because people watching this place were dangerous. Lucas asked me to stay hidden if things went wrong. Said somebody honest might come eventually. Sheriff Mercer stepped forward carefully. And the truck? Watching the cabin. The man nodded once. Wanted to know if Ranger found the right person. Did not trust anybody at first. Silence followed. Strange silence. Not fear anymore. Relief maybe. The kind people feel when unfinished things finally stop hurting. Mercer carefully radioed for state investigators once weather allowed signal. By sunrise, enough evidence waited beneath the glacier to uncover everything Lucas tried warning people about months ago. Hidden operations. Stolen equipment. Illegal routes buried beneath winter storms. Quiet crimes hidden where nobody wanted to look. But none of that mattered most to Caleb anymore. 2 days later, Alaska finally looked peaceful again. Snow softer. Wind quieter. Sunlight stretching gently across frozen mountains outside the cabin. The stranded family safely gone. Sheriff Mercer back in town. State officials handling the rest. Caleb sat on the wooden porch holding hot black coffee, while Ranger rested quietly beside him, finally calm for the first time since the rescue. No pacing, no searching, no waiting by windows. Just peace. Caleb looked down at him quietly. "You know," he said softly, "I thought I jumped into freezing water to save some stubborn dog." Ranger lifted his head slightly. Caleb smiled faintly. Small smile. Rare smile. "Turns out," he said, scratching gently behind Ranger's ears, "you were the one trying to save something all along." Sunlight stretched farther across snow-covered trees while smoke drifted quietly from the cabin chimney. Alaska still looked cold, still looked lonely, but somehow not as lonely anymore. Because after years of silence, Caleb finally understood something important. Some missions did not end when people disappeared. Sometimes loyalty kept going. Sometimes healing arrived covered in fur. And for the first time and longer than Caleb could remember, neither the old Marine nor the faithful German shepherd looked like they were waiting for somebody else to come home.